I stood in our new kitchen, watching Marcus assemble the massive steel grill. His colleagues were coming tonight, the first gathering in our new house. The yard stretched beyond him, larger than anything we'd owned before. Trees lined the perimeter, creating a private world. When we'd signed the papers 3 weeks ago, Marcus had walked the property line twice. "This is it, Erica," he'd said. "This is where we start over." Start over from what? Our 28-year marriage hadn't been broken, just quiet, predictable. Marcus looked up, catching my gaze through the window. He smiled and gestured toward the scattered instruction manual. I walked outside with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Need help?" I offered. He accepted the tea gratefully. "Tom and David will be impressed. And that new guy, Graham." Marcus had mentioned Graham several times, a recent hire, younger than us, unmarried. "How many people did you invite?" "6, maybe 7. Small group." He returned to the grill assembly. "I want them to see this place, see what we've built." What we'd built. The phrase struck me oddly. The house had been expensive, but Marcus had insisted. He'd been different since the promotion, more confident, more willing to take risks. "They'll be here at 7, he said, standing back to admire his progress. "I want tonight to be perfect." Perfect. Another weighted word. I walked to the patio's edge. In the far corner, near the largest oak, Marcus had planted a small apple tree 2 days ago. It looked fragile, its thin trunk supported by wooden stakes. "Why an apple tree?" I'd asked. "New beginnings," he'd said simply. Now I wondered what kind of beginning he had in mind. In our bedroom, I chose a simple summer dress, navy blue with small white flowers, appropriate for a casual backyard gathering. But as I smoothed the fabric, I caught something in my reflection, a question in my own eyes I couldn't answer. What did Marcus want from tonight? The doorbell rang at exactly 7. Marcus hurried inside, wiping his hands, his face flushed with satisfaction. "That'll be Tom," he said. "He's always punctual." Tom Bradley stood on our porch with his wife Susan, both carrying wine bottles. 2 more cars pulled into our driveway. David Chen emerged with his partner Alex. The second car held 3 men I didn't immediately recognize. Marcus made introductions. The younger man was Graham, mid-40s, with easy confidence. The other 2 were newer employees. Outside, Marcus took command of the grill with obvious pride. The men clustered around him, while Susan, Alex, and I arranged food on the patio table. "How long have you been in the house?" Alex asked. 3 weeks. We're still getting used to all the space." I excused myself for more wine. In the kitchen, I paused at the window, watching the group. Graham stood slightly apart, his attention divided between the conversation and something else. When I followed his gaze, I realized he was looking at the kitchen window where I stood. Our eyes met through the glass. He didn't look away. I stepped back, my heart beating faster. When I returned outside, Graham was helping Marcus with the grill, but I felt his awareness of me like a physical presence. "Erica," Tom called out. "Marcus was telling us about your garden plans." "Plans?" I moved closer. "For the back corner," Marcus said, gesturing toward the apple tree. "Erica has ideas about expanding it into a proper orchard." I didn't have any such ideas, but I smiled and nodded. "Apple trees need company to fruit properly," Graham said. "Cross-pollination." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "That's the plan. Multiple varieties." As darkness settled, Marcus lit the tiki torches. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows, creating an atmosphere more intimate than a simple barbecue. I caught Graham watching me again. When he smiled, I felt something shift inside me, a recognition of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. Dinner passed in conversation and wine. I found myself refilling glasses, playing the hostess role I'd perfected over decades. But tonight felt different. The men's attention lingered on me in ways that would have been inappropriate elsewhere. Graham helped me carry dishes into the kitchen. In the bright lights, he looked older than I'd first thought, with lines at his eyes and silver at his temples. "Beautiful home," he said. "You and Marcus have built something special here." "Thank you. Marcus loves entertaining." "And you?" Graham moved closer. "Do you love entertaining?" The question carried weight beyond its words. I looked up at him, and the kitchen suddenly felt smaller. "I'm still learning," I said. We returned to the patio, where conversation had shifted to personal topics. Marcus stood and moved to the cooler for another beer. As he passed my chair, he placed his hand on my shoulder, a casual gesture that felt deliberate. "Gentlemen," he said, "I want to propose a toast." Everyone raised their glasses. "To new houses," Marcus began, "new friendships, and new possibilities." The word hung in the air like smoke. I felt something shift in the group's dynamic. "To possibilities," Graham echoed, his eyes on me. We drank, and the wine tasted different, charged with meaning I was only beginning to understand. Marcus remained standing, swaying slightly. "You know," he said, "Erica has always been the most beautiful woman in any room." Embarrassment heated my cheeks. "Marcus." "No, it's true." He looked around the circle. "But beauty isn't the only thing that matters. There's mystery, adventure." The conversation had taken a dangerous turn. I started to stand, but Marcus's hand pressed me back down. "She's not just beautiful," he continued, his eyes never leaving mine. "She knows how to surprise." Around the circle, our guests shifted uncertainly. Marcus moved closer, his hand sliding to rest on my chair back. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to something almost intimate. "If you want," he said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "See for yourself." The patio fell silent, except for distant traffic and wind through the oaks. I stared up at my husband, trying to understand what he'd just offered. Graham was the first to move. He stood slowly, extending his hand toward me. "Erica?" His voice was gentle, questioning. I looked at Marcus. His face showed no uncertainty, no regret. Whatever this was, he wanted it to happen. My hand found Graham's almost without conscious decision. He helped me stand, and I felt every gaze upon us. David rose from his chair, less certain but reaching toward me. His hand settled on my shoulder, the contact sending electricity through me. I turned back to Marcus one final time. He'd moved to the chair beneath our largest oak, his expression unreadable in the flickering torchlight. The apple tree stood nearby, its thin trunk pale in the darkness. Marcus had planted it himself, talking about new beginnings. Now, surrounded by these men, I understood what kind of beginning he'd had in mind. What happened next belongs to shadows and flickering torchlight, to the space between what can be spoken and what must remain implied. Graham's hands were patient, reverent. David's touch carried urgency, tempered by gentleness. Around us, the others watched, witnesses to something that transformed our quiet patio into a stage for desires I'd never admitted. The details fade into sensation and starlight, into summer wind through oak leaves and the sound of my own breathing. Time stretched and contracted like shadows cast by the tiki flames. Marcus remained in his chair, motionless as a statue. In brief moments, when I could focus beyond the immediate, I caught glimpses of his face. Not jealous or angry, but intensely concentrated, as if studying something he'd waited years to understand. The night air cooled my skin where fabric had been displaced. Hands traced paths that redefined my body's geography, awakening territories I'd forgotten existed. I heard my own voice making sounds I didn't recognize. When it was over, I found myself standing in the center of our patio, surrounded by men who looked at me with something approaching awe. My dress was wrinkled but intact. My hair had escaped its arrangement. I felt transformed in ways deeper than the physical, as if some fundamental aspect of myself had been revealed. The group dispersed with awkward efficiency, handshakes and quiet thank yous, car doors closing, engines starting. Within 20 minutes, Marcus and I stood alone. Marcus approached me slowly. When he stopped, we were close enough to touch, but neither of us reached out. "How do you feel?" he asked. I tested my emotional state like someone checking for injuries. "Different," I said finally. "Good different." "I don't know yet." He nodded, as if this were the answer he'd expected. I began gathering plates, needing the familiar ritual of clearing and organizing. Marcus helped without speaking. As I loaded the dishwasher, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back appeared the same, but something had changed behind my eyes. Marcus appeared in the reflection beside me, his hands settling on my shoulders. "No regrets?" he asked. The question hung between us, weighted with implications I was still processing. "Ask me tomorrow," I said. But even as I spoke, I knew the answer. The woman who'd stood on this patio, accepting the touch of strangers while her husband watched. That woman felt more alive than I had in years. The apple tree stood in the corner of our yard, barely visible in the darkness. Tomorrow, it would still be there, a symbol of whatever we were becoming. I woke before the alarm, my body humming with energy I couldn't name. Beside me, Marcus slept deeply. The clock read 5:47 a.m. I slipped from bed and walked to the kitchen, where evidence of last night's gathering waited in neat stacks. On the counter lay Graham's business card. Through the window, I noticed the apple tree listing slightly. One of its support stakes had shifted. I made coffee and carried my mug outside, still in my nightgown. The morning air was cool against my skin. Up close, the damage was minor. The stake had loosened in the soft earth. "You're up early?" Marcus's voice startled me. He stood on the patio with his coffee, watching me. "Couldn't sleep," I said, gesturing toward the tree. "This needs attention." He joined me, and together we worked the stake back into the ground while I held the tree steady. "Fragile things," he said, testing the repair. "Need support until they're strong enough to stand alone." I wondered if we were still talking about trees. Back inside, we moved around each other with careful courtesy. Marcus left for his morning run. I used his absence to process what had happened, what it meant, what came next. When Marcus returned, sweaty and energized, he found me still at the kitchen table with my coffee and Graham's card. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "Questions," I corrected. "Lots of questions." He sat across from me. "Ask me anything." "Why?" The word came out sharper than intended. "Why did you do that?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because I love you," he said finally. "And because I wanted to see you alive again." "I was alive before." "Were you? When was the last time you felt truly awake? Truly present in your own life?" The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. For years, I'd moved through my days with competent efficiency, but alive, present. Those were different things entirely. Last night, I said quietly. I know. I could see it in your face. The way you looked when Graham touched you. I haven't seen that expression in years. I pulled my hand back, needing space. And that didn't bother you? Seeing another man touch your wife? It excited me. His honesty was brutal and immediate. Watching you discover that part of yourself, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. What happens now? I asked. Marcus glanced at the business card. That's up to you. Graham left his number for a reason. So did the others. I thought about David's gentle hands, about the woman I'd become in those moments. Confident, sensual, fully present. And you'd be okay with that? With me seeing them again? I'd be more than okay. Marcus's voice carried anticipation that made my stomach flutter. I'd be grateful. Outside, the sun had fully risen, transforming our yard into ordinary suburban space. But I knew now that appearances were just the surface, that beneath the everyday exterior lay possibilities I was only beginning to understand. 3 months later, I stood beside the apple tree again. Autumn had strengthened its trunk, and the support stakes were no longer necessary. It had survived its first season, adapting to soil and climate, finding its place. Like me, it had changed. Graham's business card had led to coffee the following week, then dinner, then afternoons when Marcus was at work. The other men from that night had faded into memory, but Graham had become something more, a presence that challenged and awakened me. Marcus knew about our meetings. More than knew. He encouraged them, asking questions that revealed his own complex desires. Our marriage had evolved into something unrecognizable, something that couldn't be easily categorized or explained. I heard footsteps and turned to find Marcus approaching. He'd been working in his office, but something in my posture must have drawn him outside. "Thinking?" he asked, settling beside me beneath the tree's small canopy. Remembering that first night, how different everything seemed. And now? I considered the question. The woman who'd stood here 3 months ago, shocked by her husband's proposition, felt like a stranger now. I'd learned things about myself, about desire, about freedom, about the difference between being loved and being truly seen. Now it feels normal, I said. Natural. Marcus smiled, and in that expression I saw the man who'd planted this tree, who'd orchestrated that first evening with such careful precision. No regrets? The question had become a ritual between us, asked and answered countless times. But its meaning had evolved, deepened into something more complex than simple satisfaction. None, I said, and meant it. The apple tree would never bear fruit. We'd learned it was ornamental, beautiful, but sterile. But that seemed appropriate. What we'd cultivated wasn't about traditional outcomes or conventional expectations. It was about growth for its own sake, about the courage to become something new.